Helen, when did you start collecting? And I've got to ask you why.
I would say about 25 years ago, when my baby son was born, and I came across a bin bag with some old Ladybird books which were being sent to the charity shop, and I showed them to my baby son. And I just see, he was less than a year old, but he was looking at the artwork and reading the pictures and just concentrating on them in a way so much more comprehensively than he had been with the sort of cartoon illustrations in all the books he'd been given. And I just thought, oh, Ladybird books, yeah, I remember those. And I started just picking up the ones I remembered. And for one reason or another, I must have the collecting gene. And it all got a bit out of hand, really. And husband and I would be trawling the car boot sales and the charity shops and the jumble sales and hoovering them up.
Well, the wall of Ladybird covers behind you shows just how prolific a title this was. You're not just a collector, you've looked into the history of Ladybird.
Yeah.
Where did it come from?
Well, for me, I mean, I started collecting, but that led me rather indirectly to actually start, if you like, realizing that this was something we were all taking for granted. But what was the history? Who were the artists? Who were the writers? How did it all happen? How did this tiny little Loughborough print company turn in just a tiny span of time into this monolith of children's publishing, which dominated books that I grew up with? And that just really intrigued me, and I just started researching, and then I made a website, and people started coming to me with stories that they hadn't shared before. You know, writers, models, people who worked at the factory in Loughborough. That's really taken over from the books as my main area of interest.
This Loughborough company were producing children's books. Suddenly they hit upon the name Ladybird. Do we know why? Well,
the company was just a printers, They just were not publishers at all. And they'd already hit upon before 1914, they'd hit upon this name. We don't know why Ladybird, but what made the success was not that branding. What made the success was, in the wartime, paper rationing meant that normal work dried up. But they discovered that if they took the largest sheet of paper available at the time and folded it, printed it both sides, cut it and folded it in a particular way, you could make an entire mini Ladybird book from just one sheet of paper. That was the winning formula. Suddenly, the brand, the format, and some amazing individuals was the chemical combination that sparked off this huge success.
And I've got to say, some amazing artists working on some incredible illustrations.
That's right. I mean, to start with, Ladybird didn't think that publishing would be the way to go. They thought it was a stopgap measure for during the war. And when they carried on tentatively after the war, they went for really big names like C.F. Tunnicliffe and S.R. Badmin, who were very well known, Roland Hilder, nature artists. But as the company's success grew, they started relying on their own ability to pick out the artists who could really illustrate a particular commission. And they just were, Douglas Keane, the editorial director, was just a genius at this. And he'd take an unknown artist and say, yeah, you're perfect to illustrate the fireman, the nurse, the lifeboat men. Another artist was just perfect to illustrate Peter and Jane and the learning to read books.
Well, let's deal with Peter and Jane a moment, because that's where Ladybird actually came in to helping children learn to read. Tell me about that.
Well, in the very early books, they'd focused on preschool children. So these were the sort of books that the grandparents would take down from the shelf and read, rhymes and ABCs. And they did tentatively move into work for older children, but not very much. Douglas Keane, the editorial director, loved a boffin, and he went to Cheltenham and he heard a talk by an educational researcher. He was talking about a new way to teach kids to read, called The Key Words to Reading. So he said that basically most of what we say is based on a surprisingly small number of words. Essentially, you can boil down to nearly a quarter of spoken language to just 12 words. So what if we focus on teaching kids those 12 words and then brick by brick build up their language recognition? And so that's where Peter and Jane came from. The books start one by one introducing these 12 key words to reading, and then moving on from there through 36 books until the children can be let loose in the library. That was the theory.
The other thing I wanted to talk about was subject matter.
Yes.
How did that change or develop over the years?
Oh, very much so. I mean, we think of Ladybird as sort of cute and fluffy and suburban, but actually they were very keen in the 1950s, moving into the 60s, to show dynamic Britain. This was the age post the Festival of Britain and heavy industry. Britain's sort of colonial past was refocusing to be building motorways, to be building massive factories. The oil was going to save the world, and it was this sort of technology that they wanted to show as it developed. They went through 7 different editions of the motor car, as the British motor trade is really sort of centre stage, and but as the cars are coming out and as the world is changing, Ladybird was scrambling to sort of update everything, and also socially, so very, very domestic, quiet settings and very traditional. But then as the years go by, they want to show Peter and Jane more active and not so domestic, and Jane has jeans instead of her white frock, and you know, Peter has a sort of Beatles haircut, and so always trying to update it and keep it moving.
And Ladybird moved into the adult market too?
Well, recently there's been a huge success with books called Ladybird Books for Adults, or Ladybird Books for Grown-Ups. These are, the writers are called them pastiche books, because if you actually look on the back, they're published by Michael Joseph. So they aren't really Ladybird books. This is the joke. The joke is that they look like them. And they took the original artwork and then rewrote the text to sort of make a humorous effect, which they did. But actually, if you look on this wall of books here, you'll see that a lot of the titles, you know, are, people tell me they use them in their master's dissertations. So somebody in engineering told me that he got through a university project by basically reproducing how it worked the hovercraft straight off. So the titles aren't all just fluffy learning to read. They cover just about everything.
Ladybird has appeared in spoof images,
yes,
on social media.
All over the place. It's very easy to do.
How do you feel about that?
I think it's like anything. Is it funny? It depends. I think when it's done good-naturedly, fine. But when it's just such an easy target for satire, and if you take something which, you know, out of its context and then put language with it or sentiments that really jar, you might get a laugh. But, you know, do you feel good about that? Because it's oversimplified and sometimes misses the point. Yet, when it's done really well, and there's some companies out there that do it really well, you know, I'll laugh along with everybody.
It is, I suppose, an illustration of just how iconic the Ladybird label has become.
Well, that's true, isn't it? I mean, it's the best form of, the most genuine form of compliment, isn't it, really, I suppose? We have to say that. We all take them for granted, and yeah, that's something we should really focus on, I think. Turn around and say, this is the backdrop, but actually, what lies behind it?
The exhibition is still in the process of being set up, but it took my breath away when I walked in, and I think it's been done very well, by the way, and thank you for bringing your collection to Bath. But this is very much an exhibition for the family because it's cross-generational.
Absolutely,
isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's because of the wide range of topics that Ladybird illustrated, it really is genuinely something for everybody, not just what people always say, oh, I thought I only remembered a few books, but once they see the covers, they just go, oh, and all the memories come back again. And then you just often want to share stories with people, and you want to share them with younger kids, or, yeah.
It's funny how money comes into everything, because I've got to ask you, You are a collector of note, but you know that there are many other collectors out there.
Yes.
How valuable are some of the Ladybird books?
It's like any area of collecting, actually. It's the books that weren't so successful that are today found in fewer numbers, and therefore it makes them rarer. As a result, these aren't the books that the nostalgia hunters are looking for. So not many Ladybird books are very valuable. They were printed in huge numbers, especially in the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s. And so they're widely available today. It's something you can get into collecting without spending much money. And as long as you don't go completely overboard like I did, they don't take up very much space either.
Do you mind if I give details of your website for people that may want to make contact with you?
I would love it. And I love people asking me questions. So feel free, go to my website, and my email is on there, so people can feel free to ask questions. That's great.
Thank you very much.
That's my pleasure. I hope people enjoy the exhibition.